I would like to begin proceedings by reading a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Crocker Art Museum is on the traditional land of the Nisenan people, and the current state of California is the homeland of many tribes. We are honored to be here today. So this afternoon is the second in a new series of talks, panel discussions, and conversations whereby we deal in depth with themes, ideas, and specific artworks that make up or are prominently featured in the museum's permanent collection. The series is an opportunity to engage with the collection in unique ways by hearing directly from artists, scholars, cultural and museum workers, all of whom play a vital role in and around the museum and the artwork in its holdings. To kick off this series, way back in October, Dr. Francesca Wilmot sat down with artist Adrian Burrell to talk through his work, Learning to Swim 2019, which is currently on view on the third floor. For today's program, Dr. Wilmot returns. She must like working with me. Dr. Wilmot returns to chat with artist Wangari Mathenge, the painter behind one of the museum's newest acquisitions titled Home Sweet Home after Seurat, Manet, and Pippin 2023, on view in the Friedman Court. Usually I would ask, have you seen it yet? But you can't miss it, right? So Dr. Wilmot, who oversees a large swath of the contemporary art program here at the Crocker, has really been hard at work the last few weeks. She was even handling the drums at Chiffon's Thomas performance last month, and has put together a fascinating discussion for us all today. In preparing for this program, I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Wangari Mathenge's work and the story behind this powerful painting. Wangari, I don't know if I've told you this yet, but we are so thrilled to have this work on view that, one, it has become the poster behind our school and teacher programs brochure. My colleague Eben Bagoon worked with Pulitzer Prize-winning Sacramento-based cartoonist Darren Bell to recreate it as part of the cover for the museum's Black History Month Family Festival newspaper. And I have no doubt that this work will become one of the Crocker's iconic artworks, sitting alongside works like Stephen Kaltenbach's Portrait of My Father, 1972 to 1979, and Luis Jimenez's Progress 2, 1974. Just the other day, I saw a group of school students begin their museum tour with your work, and I thought about how many people will be inspired and impacted by this artwork in the future to come, and to say it really resonated would be an understatement. So for those of you who do not know Wangari Mathenge, she lives and works between London and Chicago, Illinois, and Francesca and I like to count her as a local with time spent in Sacramento. Yes, we like to support our own, right? Mathenge holds degrees from Howard University and Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C. In the summer of 2021, Mathenge completed her MFA in painting and drawing at the School of Art Institute in Chicago, another Chicago connection between Dr. Wilmot. She's been highlighted in the Artsy Vanguard as one of the most promising artists working today. And solo exhibitions include Pippi Holdsworth Gallery, London, 2023, Roberts Projects, LA, 2023 and 2019, and her work appears in collections at the Dallas Museum of Art, Dallas, Texas, the National Museum of Art, Durham, North Carolina, the Rebel Family Collection, Miami, Florida, and of course, our very own Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, California. Wangari, it's an honor to host you today, and thank you both for putting together such a wonderful conversation. We look forward to hearing your thoughts. So, before we turn to the program, a reminder that spring programming is full swing, so be sure to check out our website at crockerart.org for more information. And for those of you who aren't members, how many members are here in the audience quickly? Awesome, I love it. So for those of you who aren't members, your ticket to today's program can be rolled into a membership. Just see the front desk on your way out. For format for today, after a brief introduction from Francesca, we'll jump into the conversation and chat on stage for about 50 minutes. They both did a run-through yesterday, so they were saying I might have to cut them short, but let's see how they do. And then we'll open up for questions, which I'm sure we'll get a lot of good questions today. So if you could take a moment to silence your cell phone or any electronic devices, and then please join me in welcoming Wangari and Francesca to the stage.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes, okay, great. So let's get started. So I first just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out from Chicago and joining us here in Sacramento. As Houghton said, we count you as one of our own, and it really has been such a privilege to work on the acquisition of this painting for the museum. I joined the museum about a little over a year ago, so this is one of the first big acquisitions that I was involved in. And just to get to know you over the past year has been really an honor, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been wonderful getting to know you and Houghton. And Houghton, thank you for that wonderful introduction. But yes, I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and your painting has just transformed not only the lobby, but I think the whole museum. It really has set the tone for the museum. And yeah, I'm so excited that we have it in our collection.
Thank you.
So Home Sweet Home is kind of a homecoming of sorts, with you returning to Sacramento, where you lived for 5 years. And of course, Sacramento was not your only home. You've lived in so many different countries and cities. And this painting is actually set on your family's land in Karen, outside of Nairobi. So if you could, tell us more about how ideas of home relate to this painting.
Yeah, I think for a while now, my practice delves with ideas of home, and it's just sort of incidental how that has happened. With this specific painting, even though it is set in Karen, that just happens to be the location of it. But the thinking really behind this painting was a way of referencing art history, because this painting, as you know, is part of a bunch of paintings that I did for a show that I had at Roberts Projects in the spring of 2023. And all the paintings from that show were based on art historical paintings, most of them iconic.
We have a few images of those that we'll get to.
Yeah. So while there is, sort of this concept of home, and I'm sure, part of what is my investigation into diasporic material culture. And that being because I have just lived abroad, but then it's been home. As living in the diaspora, I've always been interested in how do you make home away from home, and what does home mean? But that wasn't really the thinking behind this specific work, because actually I was at home when this was being made.
Yeah. So you were back in Kenya.
I was back in Kenya.
Yeah.
But the idea was really paying homage to art history specifically, for setting me on this path towards a serious art practice. Because prior to that, I probably did not, while I loved painting and everything, I wasn't thinking deeply enough to think that it could be a serious endeavor. And so for me, this is an homage to art history, because I took this art history class with this fantastic teacher, Lynn Robinson, at Laney College. And she opened my eyes to what it meant to look at work and, sort of understanding the socio-political, economical, backdrop of the painting. And I don't know, I think it just she unpacked painting and art in a way that no teacher before had done, because before it was just very this is this period and these are the artists of this period. And it was very bland, and it's this is Cubism and this is Picasso, but there's no real understanding of why did he do this, and why did he shift in the way that he was making in this specific sort of period. And this was my first major show in the United States after completing my MFA, which is something that I had contemplated for years. And was so scared to do because of the expense, and I'm like, who's gonna pay all that money? But I got to the, and it's because the thing is that there's always this notion of art not being a very serious enterprise, and especially I think for me growing up in Kenya, my parents were like, that's your hobby. And, you know.
Yeah, and you were telling me you have 5 degrees, which is
I do.
very impressive.
Yeah.
So an MBA and a JD and many other ones.
Yeah. And most of the, so the earlier degrees are a quest of, searching. So I'm searching for where my soul is settled. I mean, I remember telling my mom once when I was practicing as an attorney in Massachusetts that, oh, I just, my soul is not at rest. And she's like, what do you mean? You're getting money, you have, like, what do you mean your soul is not, And I'm like, yeah, but I just feel troubled, And I just used to feel, because I used to work for a corporation which had like 5,000, employees,
Oh, wow.
and the legal department was an entire floor, where I think about 300 lawyers. Mm-hmm. And I just always used to think of myself as this sort of like machine, walking in, walk into the building.
A robot.
A robot, sit behind my desk, work from, 9 to 9 p.m. and completely soulless. And while I could do the job, I just felt that this wasn't my calling, Yeah. Like I didn't think about it after. When I left work, I'd be like, time to live,
Yeah.
And then it's sort of you're in this different reality while you're at work. And I think for me, I knew that this wasn't it. But it really took a long time to search for what it was. But honestly, like I never thought that that people were seriously out there making paintings for a living. Mm-hmm. I didn't think that it was a possibility. So it was never really something that I aspired to. But I rediscovered it through searching for peace, for inner peace. Mm-hmm. And so I actually remember my partner at the time when I was like living in Massachusetts saying to me, try and do something that that you love as a hobby after work, so that you're sort of like lifted, from this experience. And so I went to a Michael's store.
Okay.
And so I went to Michael's and I was like, okay, I'll grab a drawing pad and some crayons and and that's how it started, just with me, doodling.
How many years ago was that?
That was like in 2005, 2006. Wow. And yes, so yeah. I'm like, okay, it's time to do that. And the other thing I like doing a lot is writing. So I also started, creating these fictional worlds and really just trying to find a way to, for some levity, some release from this other life, which I felt I was bound to live out, forever until I retired. But yeah.
And then in 2019, you were living in Sacramento and you decided to make that leap and pursue the MFA at SAIC, which is a wonderful university, if I do say so. So we have that in common.
Yeah.
I got my MA there. And one of the brilliant things about SAIC is that all of the art history courses are a coming together of artists and art historians. And the museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, is your classroom.
Yeah.
And so I have some of your reference images here.
Yeah.
And I thought we could start by kind of unpacking some of the imagery, the art historical imagery.
Yes.
And you shared with me that before, of course, the pandemic began shortly after you started your MFA, but before it began, you got to spend some time in the galleries with this Seurat painting.
Yeah, so the way it is, as you know, is, the classes, the building that I was in was, which is the studios, is directly opposite the museum. I mean, you sort of just cut across the road and walk into the museum. And so my advisor, I had one advisor who specifically would talk, a lot about Seurat's work, which is housed there. Mm-hmm. The first thing that was interesting to me when I first saw it was how not huge, I thought it was going to be like much larger because he worked on it like for 2 years.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh my gosh, granted that it's pointillism and that will take time, but in my mind, I always thought it was bigger. I mean, it's about 2 by 3 meters, which is not small by any measure, but then
Yeah, it's about 10 feet wide.
Yeah, but I always thought it would be like larger. So when I went, I was like, oh, this is it. I mean, not like the not like the Mona Lisa, because that's the one that like everybody's like, what? You know, because like if you're around people, like you can't even see it, you know, like you have to kind of like bustle your way to it. So this isn't, but I think even just the way it still looks and the way it's preserved is like really like interesting. But for me, what happened is the way my instructor sort of unpacked this painting. Mm-hmm. Because on the outset, it just, you know, I was just thinking pointillism. So he's just trying to figure out how to make a color using not that color, you know, using other colors, you know?
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's so much more going on in this painting. So like, for instance, the woman with the monkey, which I'd never even seen, like when I'd look at the actual painting, she has this monkey on the leash.
Yeah,
but then,
see if I can,
yeah. But then what does that mean? You know? And, you know, apparently it means it's a person with loose morals. And like, you know, who would think that, you know?
Yeah.
And these are like lower, like sort of like middle class, like Parisians at this island, which is, you know, off somewhere on the Seine. And, you know, they're just sort of sitting there, but they're just little interesting nuggets of, you know, compositional choices, certain like ellipses and everything. Actually, one thing that I borrowed from there, which people might not necessarily notice, is that the shadow is the exact shadow that also appears in that I borrowed that same. Actually, you can see it like side by side that way.
Yeah.
That where it hits is the same.
This shadow here.
Yeah. But they're looking at a body of water, and mine are kind of looking into bushes. Like, who knows what they're looking into? You know, there's like really nothing to, you know, look at. And they're all sort of oriented the same way, but it doesn't necessarily make sense the way that this painting makes sense. But yeah,
and then I have the next image. I skipped ahead to Horace Pippin.
Yeah.
We're going out of order here.
That's fine.
Because I have some more images on the Manet.
Okay.
So what was your thinking behind the Horace Pippin? And one question I had specifically in regard to that is, Horace Pippin is a self-taught artist, and a lot of his work is bringing together autobiography and history.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting in relation to your work.
Yeah, I think it's similar in that sense, and I think maybe incidental, and I think you will find a lot of this going on anyways with all artists. It could be that we see that it is biographical in sort of maybe the factual basis of the life that you've lived, or it could be and objectively so, that these are the circumstances that you've been in. So for instance, in Pippin's case, he was at war in France, World War I, and was injured to the extent that he couldn't do the kind of work that he did prior to going to war. Okay. And so that's how he becomes an artist. And then these become like, the way he wants to tell stories becomes, you know, part of this lived experience. While, you know, other people, it's probably less obvious, it's psychological, but it's still biographical in that way, because it's like, what are the, you know, especially like with abstraction, it's this like, it's still a piece of me telling, it's a telling of me and my experiences and what I want to put out in the world. So I think we operate in the same way, but I kind of feel like every artist like operates in this way.
And you told me that, you know, there's the connection between France and Pippin, because he was based in France during World War I, and Seurat and Manet were there as well earlier. Yeah. But also his life dates. He was born in 1888, and then I think it was Seurat?
Seurat, yeah. So they all overlap in some way. So Manet is the oldest, and then before Manet, when Manet is about maybe 27, Seurat enters the scene, and just before Seurat passes away, he's born. But of course, he's in the United States, in Philadelphia at that point.
So just when Seurat passed away in 1891. So
yes,
Pippin was just 3 years old.
Yeah. And at that point, he's in the United States, but who's to know that, later on, in like 1914, somewhere between that and 1918, he's going to go to France to serve in World War I, and is going to get injured. He was actually shot by a sniper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and injured his right arm, which was a blessing for him, because then he came and did. He probably would not have become a painter, or the painter that he became.
Yeah. And there's a lot of debate with the painting, The Park Bench, about whether or not it's a self-portrait of Pippin.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he says it's not. It was.
No, actually, he died before he completed this work.
Yeah, it was done right at the end of his life.
Yeah, it was, and it might not actually be complete, because I think it's his last painting. But then, yes, I think many people think that it is, like, I think it's Romer Bearden who makes a comment that that he was stating that he had like finished like all the things that he was supposed to do. But I'm like, I don't know, he was like really young. So he was in his 50s. Is it like 58 or something? So, would he be like really commenting? I mean, would he be feeling like he's finalized life? I don't know. Maybe, maybe there was something going on, but yeah.
And your subject for this, the model, has some personal significance as well.
Yeah, it's based off of like my husband, who was, by the way, take number 2. He wasn't take number 1. It's easy to just drop on people who are like close to you. And so I actually had a model who had posed. But then later on, when I was choosing which images to use and how to create this composition, I just felt like the orientation of the bench and just how maybe the angle in which I had shot was not giving the reference that I was like looking for. And I was at my brother's house at the time and, really just thinking about it. And my husband was just hanging out there. And I was like, hey, go wear a, coat, grab your cap, turn it and come and let's like try another shoot. And if I feel like it, works better, then we'll have you, we'll use that. So, yeah.
That's a great story. And then the last reference is Manet's, the lunch on the grass, luncheon on the grass. And so this painting is so loaded, art historically speaking. And you commented once when we were chatting how looking at Manet's work really gave you permission to move the narrative forward. And the fact that Manet is actually referencing Marc Antonio's work from 1510. And so it's, an art historical citation of another citation. And it goes back and back.
The sort of the lineage of this, this painting is, it even goes like possibly even further back. And then there are also like other references like that there's a possibility where these ideas come from, like even Titian. But for me, it was very interesting when I learned of, this specific painting, the Judgment of Paris, because here you have, Greco-Roman mythological scene playing out. But then he segregates a little bit of that scene to then tell his own story of, these individuals who are recognizable, like the woman who doesn't, have clothes is, probably a model that he's used. Is probably like Olympia in the other, in his Odalisque. So thinking that, juxtaposing sort of this idea, or actually thinking I'm going to borrow this composition, but then tell this different story of whatever he's considering like interesting of these characters at this time in Paris, I thought was like really interesting, because for some reason, he wants you to be aware that there is a reference. Mm-hmm. And then I think it takes it a step further into what he's doing. I mean, like, they're not clothed there in the mythological scene, but then that's a state that we consider natural and ordinary. Like, they're not unclothed, you know, and exactly. Mm-hmm. They're nude by origin, and which is very different from Manet's, where it's like, no, she had clothes and they're over there, we can see them,
right?
And she has taken them off. And why has she taken them off? Yeah. And who is she looking at? And the other interesting thing is that if you look at, you know, his like sort of compositional choices, that even, you know, so this, the gentleman who is like pointing is probably looking at the other guy, but the other guy is not looking at him. He's like looking off somewhere else. Like they're not interacting in any way. And what is that woman doing, you know,
at the top
back there? Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and then she's not proportional. So these are all the very interesting things that I got. And you know, that woman back there is the giraffe.
That's right, yeah. So, sorry, we cut off the giraffe's head here.
And the giraffe is not proportional. And you know, like it is just, it's, you know, I just plonked it and I was like, it's the giraffe. But it's the oddity and thinking about what oddities make sense in my life. And I know I mentioned to you that a lot of this painting has to do with a comment that someone once made to me when I had just moved to the United States, and I was in school in San Diego, and it was actually my first probably year going back home to Kenya for the holidays. And, you know, the person said to me like, oh, you know, what are you going for? Like, are you missing the animals? And I'm like, geez, like, you think the animal, and then they said like, you could go to the San Diego Zoo, you know? You know, if you're missing your animals. But then, and I just thought like, so do you think that, you know, we just roam around like with animals, you know, like with giraffe, with lions, you know, and all, there'd be no Africans, you know, would be a goner. Would be in the history books, you know?
Hanging out in the park.
Exactly. Yeah. And also just, you know, also thinking about that and thinking how the looking of, you know, the seeing of animals. So even here, like visiting a zoo, I think it's a privileged thing. Like not everyone can afford the entrance to go and see like animals.
It's often really pricey.
Yeah, exactly. And in Kenya, and I'm sure in other, you know, countries in Africa, many Africans have not seen these, you know, wildlife outside of a TV. They haven't, because you have to pay to go into, you know, where they're enclosed. And if they are in one of these like sort of reserves, it's expensive and you need a car and you know, you're toured into, you know, so safaris are not for Kenyans, or Africans. It's people of the West who, exactly. Yeah. So there may be more people in the West have seen, you know, these animals than the Africans themselves, and it's in our backyard. So I think for me, that's one of the things that was sort of interesting. So I kept on just throwing in the biographical things that were interesting to me as I painted. Like not everything was pre-thought, but I just remember small things and I'd be like, oh, why didn't I do this? Like, you know, I set the monkey free. Yeah. Because I wasn't trying to depict a woman with loose morals, you know, like, no, there's no woman here with loose morals. So the monkey decided to join and also migrate, you know, from Sarah's panel to Manet. So the monkey is like, oh, I've gone to see Manet. And then I'm like, but what do monkeys want? And it's like bananas. So then there's some bananas right there, and I'm like, let's make this monkey, you know, travel towards the bananas.
Bigger. There we go. You can see it there. Right. And then of course the woman on the picnic blanket is clothed, and the men are not wearing tops. Yes. So what was your thinking there?
A little subversion. Yeah. You know? And let's switch the gaze. Who's looking at who now? You know? And I think it's also just a sign of the times, the things that we talk about. I think it can come off as being like maybe ultra like feminist, but not necessarily. It's just that times have changed, and now we're all okay gazing at each other, and so
like that.
yeah, and then and also just again a little bit of a commentary on even the exotic gaze and how we just look at people who are from different areas. So.
Yeah, and I have some slides of the odalisques as well, and I think that comes up there.
Right.
So
Yes.
I was curious, so you shared with me how your family's land was used for the film Out of Africa in 1985 in Karen, and how, so I was thinking about kind of the American imagination of what Africa might look like and how that's been exported. And do you think that you're kind of reclaiming or personalizing this image of Africa that has been exported? Is that one of your concerns?
No, I can see how by effect that's what is happening, because I'm showing you, Africa from my eyes, but then also let's remember that this is not really what is happening there. It's based on,
Skip ahead.
so this body of work really is just me. It's really just me paying homage to art history. And I'm not trying to tell you that this is what Africa looks like, because it doesn't. There's no leopard sitting over there right next to two human beings and everything. Really, I wanted this painting to affect, I think, me, and for me to just have something that says, a little bit about my experiences. And then, like, if we're ever so lucky, and at least I feel really lucky and honored that you invited me here to talk about it, then I can unpack it for you and tell you, this is exactly why the lamb is there. I don't know if I've ever told you why the lamb is there.
No, I would love to.
That is actually symbolic of Pippin, just overcoming. It's a symbol of sort of hope and, overcoming
diversity.
Diversity and achieving, because he, in his lifetime, was successful. It wasn't like he wasn't successful.
Yeah, he had a show at the Museum of Modern Art in 1938.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, which is pretty great, and especially because, lucky, because he's self-taught and he is, then there's this like folk art revival.
Right.
And he's right in the middle of it, and somebody sees his work. Because that's the other thing, is that there's so many makers, there's so many artists, but nobody gets to see their work. So I think it's always just a privilege if you're just so lucky that, somebody sees your work. Because there's always that first person who says, I want to share your work with someone else. And then a career is born out of that. But for most people, they're not lucky enough for that to ever happen. But they will continue making. But he was able to live off of his art until, he passed away. So for me, that's why it was. There's a lot of, almost everything had a reason before it was like, put in there, know. And one of he has a hair, like if you're looking at it, there's a hair like in the woods, and it's found a friend, and it's like celebrating with him, and it's come to the forefront.
Oh, wow, the two rabbits here.
Yes, the two rabbits.
Oh, fascinating. Well, and so looking at some of your formal decisions, I've kind of divided up, it's 4 panels, and yet there's 3 different art historical vignettes.
Yeah.
And I was curious about this. This seems like a very conscious decision not to divide it into 3 equal panels.
Yeah, I think it was a device to make it whole, and to make sure that it never read as, oh, here's Seurat, here's Manet, here's Pippin. I wanted to make sure that they bled into each other. And therefore, one, you can't really separate them and say, well, I'll take the Manet section.
Right.
If it was done that way, I think it wouldn't have been as unified as it is. And, the other unifying device I used was that boundary wall.
Yeah.
And made sure that it just sort of went all the way through.
This wall here.
Yes, that wall. But that's why it was divided that way.
Yeah, fascinating. And then we also, I've isolated all of the different animals in this slide. And we've talked about how there's some real food chain issues going on here.
Serious? No, let me tell you, there would be toothpicks and, I'm thinking who would have been the one sitting around just feeling, oh, that leopard. And that's me, by the way.
Yes. And your name, Wangari, means leopard.
It means of leopard.
Of leopard.
Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. And that's specifically, I think it was the last animal that I put in there. And I was like, where am I here? How the leopard needs to, join the crew. But yeah, I wanted it. There's also some levity in it. I mean, because a lot of, sort of the backdrop of some of this is it's a little bit absurd. It's not natural. The people who are, the manner in which they're oriented and everything, is really just referencing. So then there's a little bit, there has to be more to it. And so that's why, there's this choice. And I was okay, like, with the, food chain issues, because I was hoping that people noticed that, there's some serious stuff going. It's almost like, even, when I think about it, when you're removed from home, you tend to idealize home. Like, home might not even be that great when you're there. But then, like, you leave home and it's like, oh, I remember Kenya. Oh, how beautiful the land was. Actually, like, if you read Out of Africa, Karen Blix, and the way, like, even the opening, you're like, that land just sounds so great. And I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying that it's not that great. It is. But home, especially when you're removed from it, like, you really idealize it. And then it just takes me like 24 hours to be in Kenya, and I'm like, what's going on here? Because, like, right now they're doing a lot of, like, construction. And it's developing generally. And then I'm like, this is not how I remember it, like.
So you can kind of paint the world that you might want.
Exactly. And so this is almost like an Eden, like everybody's there, peaceful, relaxed. All the animals are free, happy, the domestic and the wildlife are, like, coexisting.
Yeah.
So
and it's interesting that even, like, the domestic, the Jack Russell Terriers, they're hunting dogs, right?
They're hunting dogs. And that also historically is, like, very timely with this piece, because Jack Russells were bred in the, like, early 19th century by an English parson whose name is John Russell. John is Jack, right? Which I've never understood. Like, why is Jack the short form of John? Because, I mean, it's like they both have 4 letters. So it's like, what's the point in, like, changing that name?
Yeah,
like, really, it's easier to call me Jack? Makes no sense.
Not a nickname. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's named after, him, John Russell, who breeds them, and they used to. It was for hunting, fox hunting, and they're very, like, very energetic, and they would have destroyed those, the chicken over there, like that. Would have been
that chicken
totally
doesn't
distressed.
stand a chance.
No, and the chicks are very cute, by the way.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like, I'm just gonna make these really cute chicks, having a good time with their mom. But then there are also, like, signs, which are ubiquitous, like in Kenya. Like, yes, there's that one. I think that's the one that says, do not feed the monkeys.
I think there's another one here as well.
Yeah, and then that one is, like, no posters. So they'll paint on walls, like, especially, like, if you're in public areas, like, no posters, and then right next to it there's a poster. And the poster is, like, even half covering the sign, no posters. But in parks and everything, do not feed the monkeys, or by order of management, things like that. And so I also put those, which I think also might be understood by a Western audience. I'm not sure. But Kenyans, if they came and saw this painting and really looked at it, they would see these sort of...
Be very relatable.
It would be very relatable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's these feet here, these disembodied feet. And then on the left side, we see this man with his feet cut off.
Yeah.
And so I was interpreting that as it being the same, body. And,
yeah.
But I don't know if that's the case. Can you tell me about this?
It's not the case, because actually, if you look really closely, like these feet, the right leg is actually crossed over the left, and that one, it's not crossed over. This was just really a way to show that this is sort of a snapshot in time, and this is what I captured. This is what the painter saw or was able to place. But there's a narrative beyond it.
Yeah, kind of like in Baroque painting. It's always cut off. It's not perfectly centered.
Right.
So you feel like you're part of the action.
Yes, exactly. And what viewpoint were you in, or what was important to you? And then even with the zebra's head,
Yes, I was wondering. Go back one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So over here, his head is cut off, but
yeah, because he's off. Like
we don't see it over here.
We caught him when he was, strolling, and that's where he was. But it gives it maybe a little bit of sense of action. But also you could, analogize it to the painting is not finished. I don't know, like there's more to it, or there's an implication of this is maybe where I am in my journey, and I'm trying to tell the universe there's more. Like, so please wait for me. Like, I have more to do. Yeah. And so there's that implication of there's more to the scene. We're always just seeing something, and this is based on everything that, our received knowledge and all the things that we have gathered in life. And when we see things from a viewpoint. Like, so for instance, when you saw this painting before we had any conversation, you probably saw the references, but then you had nothing else. Yeah. But if you were asked to speak on it, you still would have. But then based on, I don't know what you know. Like, so for instance, if anybody said, oh, I see you're inserting Black people into the canon, it's like, well, I am, but that's not like the intention. I'm making a painting, and the painting happens to have Black people. And its relation to art history is not in the sense of any trying to replace, but is really just a commentary. For me, like I said, this was paying homage to art history. I was very happy that it allowed me to see this for myself, a future in painting.
Yeah, and we were talking about this recently, that I think there's a tendency with a lot of contemporary art to think that it's, that maybe you'll see Black bodies in this painting and think, oh, we're trying to decolonize the Western canon. And that's, I could see myself presenting that kind of reading, right? And but the more I've talked with you, I've learned that's not really the ultimate goal of this painting.
No.
And you shared that someone asked, well, do you paint white figures?
Yeah.
And
I said, heck yeah.
Yeah.
I'm an equal opportunity painter. You know what I mean? If you happen to be in my vicinity and I want to paint you, or you want to be painted by me, it doesn't matter who you are, because the world that I have lived in is to be recorded that way. I've lived in Kenya for a while, but I've actually lived more out in the West. I've lived more actually in the West than I have lived in Kenya, like by a long shot, because even, so when I was born, 6 weeks after I was born, I was off in a plane to London.
Right.
Yeah, where I was for a while and then moved back to Kenya. And then, after my first degree, then moved to San Diego. And then I've sort of like lived here for that amount of time. But I think when you're telling biographical things, unless I was only like hanging out with Black people, then there's no truth to it. But no, I have, I really would paint anyone and anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all of the different subjects, the different models that you use, they came through a call, right?
Yes.
And you said that in Nairobi, where you were painting this, these are the people who showed up to the modeling call.
Right. So we actually had a talent scout who we asked and said, could you have some people, but this is the plan. And then from that we made choices, and this is like, sort of like who showed up. So no, I would paint. Yeah. I would paint whoever showed up.
And so if you painted this in Chicago, where you're living, it might look very different.
It might.
Depending on.
Exactly. Depending on who. And it would be probably talking about a whole different, subject. But at the same, it just depends on, in the moment, like who would have shown up and what's going on. But
Yeah. And then the models, you've shared that this model is the same as this one, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. It is. Some of them are like repeated. If the first shot, and even the person who is behind that model is the person who is unclothed on the right. So
him?
No, not him. The other guy, yes, is the same as the person who's standing right next to the woman with the yes, that's him.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's showing up in a lot of places. I'm actually going to be making a painting for this really good book that's celebrating its 10th anniversary, A Little Life. I don't know if you know it, by Hanya Yanagihara. And he's going to be on the cover, so he's one of the characters.
Oh, amazing! So
it's interesting the different takes you can have from a person. But he's just a really good poser. So.
Yeah. He didn't need a take two.
No. I was like, look at this image, and then pose like that. I was like,
Perfect.
So yeah, he did a good job.
Well, here, I'll click forward. So this work was presented at Roberts Projects this time last year, April of last year, and it was in the context of many other paintings that were citing art history or responding to art history. So I have a few examples here, and I thought we could kind of now zoom out a little bit from this painting and kind of understand it in relation to your broader practice.
Sure.
Yeah, so the first one is Nick at a Mirror after Rubens' Venus at a Mirror. And here, I don't know if this is the exact source material though. It's
not, but like when you do the search, like that's the easiest. And it's so funny because like, I had there's another Rubens, but other than the figure on the right, it's another Cupid, but then they have like this, they have sort of this statue with the arrows.
With the arrows.
And they are pretty much the person who's sitting with their back looks like her, but then they have their hand on, on the thigh, and it's actually very similar. But that painting like hides in the internet.
Yeah, like, I could not find it. I searched high and low.
Yeah, because it does.
I said, I know this is not the one.
Yeah, because I will at times lose it. Yeah. And the weirdest thing is, do you think phones like hide photos? Like, because I thought I saved it in an album, but it always disappears.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, but I have the reference photo here. And I'm like, it keeps on disappearing because I wanted to
Doesn't want to be seen.
Yeah, no, I think there's something weird. But this is similar enough, and it's telling the same story.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's fine. But, again, these are like, these are paintings that, that were unpacked, that were very interesting, the sort of things that you learn about them that you wouldn't necessarily know unless somebody told you this is what's like happening. if you don't understand who Venus is, like, the goddess of love, beauty, desire, and all that, it wouldn't make sense. First of all, even like, what's the Cupid there with, those arrows, and, what are they doing there, and holding the mirror, and then noticing that Venus is not looking at herself, but she's regarding you, the viewer, and, and so what's this about? Is it about, youth, beauty, and all that? So it's, for me, learning about all these things just made me realize the potential in which you could tell a story, leave a mark about how you related with the world, so that people, in the future, are able to have this understanding of how we saw the world and the things that were going on. And so, like, replacing it with a man makes sense because of all the gender issues that we discuss right now.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was like really fitting, in some way, to leave a little bit of 2022, 23 for future generations.
Yeah, interesting. And it seems like he's not looking directly at the viewer, or maybe I can't see it very well.
He is.
He is,
You can't
okay.
see it really well,
Okay.
but yeah, he also is.
He is also, okay. I wasn't sure if that was a change that you had made. Yeah. Okay, and then the next one, so the odalisques from 2023.
Yeah.
It seemed like if there wasn't a direct art historical reference, but of course, odalisques were explored by many artists, from Matisse and Manet, Renoir, and there's this kind of exoticism and Orientalism that's built into it, which today we have, the language to speak more critically about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think for me, because it's such it's an explored area in art history, like, I didn't want to leave that out. And the fact that every artist and their mother, like, at some point, was painting and depicting like odalisques, whether they had traveled. By the way, it was so interesting for me, like, to learn that sometimes these depictions of these women, like in harems and everything, was just based out of stories, and that particular painter had never seen this.
Yeah.
And so that was like also interesting, and just thinking that it becomes part of the interest of, I need to paint this, and I need to tell this story. Mm-hmm. So for me, and also thinking about some of the paintings that I had done prior to, like, there's that one painting that I mentioned.
Yeah, I can skip ahead to, was it one of these?
No, the one where the woman is lying with her, yes, that one.
This painting.
Yeah, which is an early painting that, but it also has that sensibility of an odalisque. And like, a lot of people used to comment that you always have these people like at rest or at leisure, like in the past. And
even
so
in the press release for this exhibition, which was your 2019 Roberts Project show, where it debuted, your first semester at the School of the Art Institute, which is just incredible. It's even there, the press release talked about leisure and relaxation.
Right.
And, I wasn't sure if that was your reading or the gallery.
In retrospect, you're like, okay. I mean, I mean, like, like, you could read it like that, but sometimes paintings are just paintings. You know? Like, sometimes it's just like, hey, and so, in this specific instance, I called my husband, and I'm like, come and take a photo.
And so this is you, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes that's all it is. And because the thing is, I think we emphasize on what's this work about. Well, sometimes it could be exploration of, like, I don't know, formal, like, compositional, like, qualities, or like paint. I want to learn how to use, like, in this particular instance, like, maybe it was a light and shadow thing that I was like working out. So I think currently there's a lot of emphasis on what is this about, and what's the meaning, while in all honesty, I think if we all thought this way from the get-go, like our art would be very stifled. Our paintings would be very stifled because you'd have to sit and be like, what am I going to paint next? When really discovering what you're painting while you're in the process of painting is more naturalistic. And I think there's a lot of post-rationalization that goes on anyways.
Yes,
like sometimes
that's
you,
my
yeah.
job. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
'Cause, I mean, sometimes you'll hear like, artists, saying, oh, this is about, I don't know, ABCD. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I can't see it.
Yeah.
But it can be whatever it's about.
Yeah.
But
And you said you don't do sketches, or generally speaking, you do have photographs that you work off of.
Yeah.
But it's not like it was meticulously sketched out.
It's not that serious of an endeavor, you know what I mean? Which is like, I'm going to figure, I'm not afraid of the canvas.
Yeah.
I feel like a canvas can take a beating. You can paint layers. And this, again, is learned from art history, where, now, years later, they're like, oh, there was another painting under that painting and under that painting. And so many choices are made in the process of doing it. And you can do that with a canvas. You can, even if it's built out very thick, you can sand it down, you can recoat it and, work on it. So
Forgiving.
it's very forgiving. And so for me, I've always felt, go to the canvas, and let it work itself out.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to skip to some of your most recent work, because I think we've got like 6 or 7 minutes left, and so people can see what you're... So we'll just flip through these, a little preview. So these are from your 2021 show at Pippi Holdsworth. You are here. It's hard not to... Do you want to tell me if you want to stop?
Stop.
Okay. I know, like there's so much to say. Sorry,
Yeah,
Houghton.
Yeah. I know. I mean, this was an installation at Pippi Holdsworth, which you did.
This is when I first saw Wangari's work, was when I was in London in 2021 working on my PhD, and and it was revelatory, this exhibition. It wasn't just paintings; it was also an installation.
Yeah, of a 1970s home. So
Your
based
home,
on
right?
Yes, exactly. And what was like very interesting for me is, as I went through this process, I got to learn about this time in my life where I don't have like primary memory. And it's interesting when you think about the fact that there's this gap in your life that you feel like you were totally there. And yet you weren't, like when you're a baby, like you're not there, the mind hasn't attached itself like properly. Exact conscience is not there. So, but why do you never feel like this is the day I came into the world? Like when even when you're thinking about early memories, you don't feel that detachment, but it's because of that you've been told. So my mom will be like, you used to go out with your nappies, and you'd wait for the milkman, and I'd be like, Mukman, and apparently this is something that has stuck in their memory, and I see myself as this, and then I've seen these photos, right?
Yeah, and so all of these paintings, the Expat series, are based on childhood family photos.
Right. So basically, this is a time that I have no primary recollection. This is stories and albums, and so this is where you live, this is how it was, and going through it all. But because remember, I've been looking at these albums since I was like really young, so it's not like I started looking at them now.
Yeah.
But through life, I mean, we accumulate all these images, but then it takes you asking about them to then really learn, like, who were your parents, at that point. Like, and so I got to learn more about who my parents were. What their interests were, as you're looking through these, images and deciding what to use. And then also learned more about, myself and just the family, generally. And so I thought the fact that this show was going to be in London, which is where, exactly. I thought, why don't I even try and just recreate this space? So it also had just objects. So like albums, what music were they listening to, and things.
And there
like
was an animation as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So a retro TV, retro like typewriter. the viewfinder with the Jungle Book in there. But it's like sort of an Enid Blyton sort of books. I mean, but all these like things were there. There's a photograph of Kenyatta, who was the president at the time of Kenya, the first president of Kenya. And, because my dad was working in the Commonwealth, he's still a Kenyan. Yeah. But it's like, what image would you have of, the president, of the country? But so you have all these, like, interesting things that, like, I discovered and other people get to discover. They get to sort of walk into this space that is, removed, but then, get a sense of, like, my childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think throughout this exhibition, you're commenting on the diaspora and ideas of displacement and kind of returning to ideas of home and how fraught that and contentious that can be.
Yeah.
So that leads us to your most recent exhibition just this past fall at Pippi Holdsworth in London.
Yes.
And so while the work that we just were looking at is looking maybe at more global issues of migration, this body of work is looking at domestic workers in Kenya.
Yes, it is. This was a group of 20 women that I invited to my Nairobi studio it was during the pandemic. So it was about like 2022, early 2022. And they just answered a call to come in and be painted. But really the surprise behind it all was that they were being invited for a day of rest because they are quintessentially like the most overworked working population, domestic workers like in Kenya. I mean, they work like maybe from like 6 a.m. to like 9 p.m. and may even be working over the weekends. So this, and then the idea that sparked this really was just because of media depiction of international sort of migration and what happens to them, and it's usually like just bad stories. And I was like, we need an uplifting story, and we also need to uplift a workforce that can be unseen.
Yeah. And to humanize. And you formed really direct connections and relationships. You were telling me how a number of the women you've stayed in touch with, and they've since left their domestic working jobs.
Yeah. And some have stayed because it's what they love, you know? Yeah. But I think it was just a very, very warming, it's probably the most interesting thing that I've had to do. And, I stay in touch with the women and, I'd love to meet more in the future, but I haven't completed this series. Yeah. It's still in progress.
So you've painted 7 of the 20 women.
Yes. And so this is a sort of like a depiction of the room in the studio where they got to relax.
Wow. Yeah, and so this is the same space. It's interesting to kind of layer those 2 different exhibitions on top of one another. At Holdsworth. So it's the same space where you had your family's London home, has since now become a recreation of your studio.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of a surprise because when they came in, when you first walk into the studio, all you see is, just the studio. And then set off with a closed door is this very relaxing room with the curtains drawn and just, with aroma and very peaceful. And so when they'd walk in, because they really were answering a call to be painted and didn't really realize that work would entail rest as well. When we opened, at first, and we're talking about like a really messy studio, with paint and everything. And they're like, okay, we've come for our day's work. And then it would be like, oh no, but walk into this room. And they would all like gasp.
Yeah.
And really at the end of the day, they were like, we had no idea that, we can be paid to sit.
Yeah.
Which was which was like really heartwarming.
Yeah, you said they were all compensated for their time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, they were working.
They were working.
You know, they were working essentially. It was just a different kind of working.
Yeah, to shift how we think about work.
Exactly.
Yeah. And here's a few of the vignettes, the individual women. Yeah. So I know we're just about out of time. So just circling back to where we began, I was thinking, so your most recent body of work is very socially engaged and to some extent exploring class hierarchies. I don't know if you would agree with that, but
I think incidentally it does. It just does it because, you know, this is a topic that sort of like I'm addressing, but it's not like that I'm thinking about it as a thing to do. It's just incidental that it does do that.
That's kind of built in.
It's built in, yes.
Yeah, and with as I was learning about parks in Kenya through our conversations, I learned that parks like this wouldn't necessarily be visited by upper middle class citizens. They had private gardens with a key.
Right.
And so that started to shift how I was seeing this painting as well, and some of the assumptions that I might have brought to it.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could just talk about if there's any other things that are kind of coded in this painting that like an American audience might not necessarily pick up on at first glance.
No, I think we've covered like most of it, but you're right in in making that, pointing out that this is probably not the scene that you would find playing out in a park, and I mean, the one thing about this painting is that it is very obvious that this is not what you would see, and I think if anyone,
it's pretty clear.
If anyone like really came and thought that this really felt like a realistic depiction, then that's the media's fault.
Out of Africa's fault.
Exactly. We'll blame the media for spewing sort of ideas of what Africa could look like. But I think one of the things is that I think it's pretty obvious that this is not what you would see.
Right.
So even while it's factual that you would not necessarily find middle class citizens like sitting in a park like this, it's just like neither here nor there for this painting.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, it's going to be on view for a very long time. I know that. And I think it's just going to continue to unfold for all of us as we learn more and more about the piece. So please come back and tell us more. I feel like we could go on for hours. But for now, I just want to thank you again for coming from Chicago and sharing all of this wonderful information with us.
Thank you for having me, Francesca.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for your lovely talk. I was really touched by what you said at the beginning of the conversation about making the decision to take an MFA and doing a lot of other things before making that decision and weighing that decision pretty heavily. What is your advice to somebody who is considering potentially applying to MFA programs, but is feeling hung up by those things like weighing the cost of it or feeling like it's a major divergence from things that they've done in the past or seeing the validity of a career in the arts?
Yeah. So the thing about the arts is that there's no guarantees, But I feel like it's the same for any career path. So you could go to school for anything, but then who's to say that you become great at it? There are certain jobs or certain career tracks which lend themselves easily to, you can sort of, you could probably see which role that you'd fit in different corporations and all that. But there's still no guarantees you'll be really great at it. now, if you're currently doing something, you already have something. So that, you don't even really have to think about it. You have something to fall back on. And for me, the way I thought about it was, why am I going to school? One of the reasons I wanted to is to have good critical thought around my work. Because before I was just making anything. And it was just like, oh, what should I paint today, And it just had I didn't understand why I was making it. I knew that I could paint things, still lifes and figures and everything. But when it's just so all over the place, it's sort of meaningless in a way. And I wanted to have people speak about my work and help me think along. Why do you want to become an artist? Why do you want to take this as a serious endeavor? And then the other thing is that I would listen to maybe Art 21 and hear artists speaking about their work, and I'm like, what the heck are they saying? I couldn't, I didn't really understand half of what was going on, the epistemological and ontological, and I'm like...
Phenomenological.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to be able to sit there, and when they say that, I'm like, oh, okay, And even, I had the same experience when I was in law school. My first year reading opinions, I was like, what the heck is all of this jargon? But then, after you've read day in, day out opinions, now I can read opinions and I'll just read the first page and I know exactly what happened in that case, and there's no word that stumps me, and it's just a very easy thing and becomes second nature. And I wanted that. I wanted that feeling with art. I wanted to be able to be confident when I'm sitting somewhere speaking about my work, and I wanted to be confident about what I was investigating. So that's why, now you can do all these things without going for an MFA program. But if I gave you a philosophy book and told you, okay, go read this, believe you me, you're not gonna do it. It's really hard to force yourself. But with school, it's, okay, these are the lectures that you have, and you have homework, and so it is a fast track in gaining necessary information. Education is never a waste. Unfortunately, art, I think it's absurd that the kind of fees that we are required to pay for MFAs, that's really problematic. But if you have to invest in yourself that way, and that's the only way you can do it, then do it. Yeah, so I would encourage you to just, I took the plunge, and here I am. It's not, many people do. And at the end of the day, it's just money, and you're just going to have to figure out how to pay it, But then you have this education behind you, and yeah, because look, I studied law for a really long time because I have a JD and an LLM. I don't feel like it's a waste. When people are like, you're not practicing law, I kind of am. I take care of my own interests. So in my everyday, I feel confident because I can speak to many people. And so the education is just never negative. So I would say, especially if you're passionate about it, there's something saying go for it, and don't let the naysayers tell you otherwise. You do you.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. I had the honor and privilege to visit Kenya and actually visit right near your land. I went to Karen Blixen's farm and had a fabulous docent take us through it. But most importantly, I met so many beautiful Kenyans. A dear friend of mine invited me to meet her family and stay in Nairobi and also in the hills and places far away from any cities. So I came away with a real love of the people. But what strikes me most about your painting is I see Rousseau in it, and it's a peaceable kingdom to me. The peace and tranquility and beauty that you've painted is very touching. And it's so different than a recent exhibit that I went to of Kehinde Wiley. And I wonder if you've spoken with him, and if you haven't, what kind of conversation would you two have?
Good question.
So I have never met Kehinde Wiley, but one of the galleries that represents him is the gallery that represents me, Robert's Projects, which is where this show happened. So we're actually at the opening of their new gallery last year. Kehinde Wiley was show number 1 and I was show number 2. So I was right after him. But we've never spoken. But his lens is like really, I think, different because I understand his practice and how he looks at it is like very differently in terms of the elevation of the African American and in these positions of power. You know, like he even has, when you look at his work, the angles that he sort of captures these individuals and the largesse of them it's very apparent, and his celebration is very overt, and it's about these people and like, let's not forget who they are and let's put them. And when he does sample on like art historical sort of like references, he really does this this sort of like what would you call it, replacement, and he like
appropriation, or
not really appropriation, but like the Napoleon, you know, on his
like a
horse,
one for one.
Exactly, it's a 1 for 1, and it's like, it's sort of, let's see these black figures in these spaces which are understood by the West to be positions of power. So his whole thing is empowerment, while mine is not empowerment. It's just like, hey, so I would argue in that case for him, it's not necessarily biographical in a very linear way. It's biographical in his understanding of how black people and how black bodies are perceived, treated, and how they've been seen, like in art, while mine maybe might be more personal. Because when I talk about this being about, you know, me saying thank you to art history for setting me on this path, it's so personal to me. I'm very selfish that way. But I'm hoping that in my being selfish that way, it like resonates with many people, which I'm assuming, because like we all have similar experiences. And so while my story is really about me, and it's about a lot of you, because this is also, you know, sort of how you feel. So I feel like it still resonates, and maybe black people will see themselves and represented in, you know, maybe in a similar fashion to maybe the way Kehinde represents it. But I think I think I've explained maybe to the most. And what will we talk about? I don't know that we would talk about art, you know. I'd probably talk about, I don't know, his clothes.
Yes, great wardrobe.
Fashion, or, you know, or like, hey, how's Black Rock Senegal? He has a residency there. You know, like, I think we would just talk about, you know, maybe other things. Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. Thanks.
So Hi, I'm right over here.
Oh, hi.
My name is Min Ming Wu, and I just want to first thank Crocker for having you, and also this is my really first introduction to you and your work, and I really appreciated actually seeing a lot of the other works in the presentation. I hope that one day we'll be able to see some of them live here in Sacramento.
Yeah.
So my question is, I am a practicing attorney in Sacramento who also enjoys in her spare time, when I find spare time, doing art. And so I was curious, in between when you first bought those supplies at Michael's to to the moment where you developed enough of a portfolio to be able to submit an MFA, what were some things that helped you along the way? Because you were doing this in your spare time.
Yeah.
You had a very demanding position.
I think for me, so I think most interestingly is how I arrived at where I arrived now was organic. So there wasn't really a plan to become a professional artist because I didn't really know they existed, you know? And in the sense of where that's what you do all day long, and you have this studio practice that can sort of support you and maintain you that way. So really it was a matter of there's that urgency or there's that need to stay sane. And so, you know, and I needed it. And by the way, I have so many attorney friends who that's their calling, you know? And if that's your calling, then that's great, you know? And most of them are just not working for the dark side. And I was, you know, I mean, insurance. But anyway, that's another thing. That's a topic for another next time. But yeah, public service is good and all that, defense. But anyways, okay, stop. We need laws and we need legal professionals. But I personally would be depressed on Sunday because of going back to work on Monday. And that's when you know you're not really doing the right thing. The other thing was I would switch off when I left work. Like I didn't carry work with me. And I think there's something really real and true about the work. You know, we talk about work-life balance when really I think life and work you shouldn't have to think about it that way. Like it should feel so intertwined and organic that, I mean, look, here I am on a Saturday. If I was here talking about any legal things, I'm telling you, I'd have been out by now. But you want, so you need to feel comfortable enough that you can carry work with you, you can dream about it, and you don't have to remove yourself from it. And I think that's true living, because I am a believer of never retire. Like, work until your number's called, you know? And I feel like you live more holistically. And also, I don't think I would ever have been the greatest, attorney, because I'm not willing to think about it after 9 p.m. I want to go and sleep. I'm not going to wake up at 2 a.m. like, oh, I found the solution for this thing. But that's what I do as an artist, where I am constantly thinking about how to solve problems. I'm constantly thinking about, what to do next. And I fly back to Chicago tomorrow and I can't wait to get back into my studio. And to me, that is really just living. So you do it until it figures out your life for you. You don't need to figure it out. You just do what you have to do. Yeah.
Thank you for your insightful and entertaining commentary. That's marvelous. I have a question about the painting. There's a couple sitting on the wall with their backs to us under what appears to be a jacaranda tree, and I wondered if there was any special meaning with that couple. You didn't mention them when we were talking.
No, I didn't. And you know what? I think, the last entrance into this painting. So with this painting, I had mentioned when we were speaking about how organic it was. I knew what the references were, but how much of the reference was I going to include and how much of my own sort of flair and things.
And I asked Wangari, I said, can we put some sketches on the screen? Like, can we get all the preparatory materials? Show people.
What did I say?
And you were like, it was really organic. I was like, okay, we'll do it differently.
It was.
Yeah.
So, and here's the other thing, like, also part of making this work was me trying to remove the lawyer in me, who is going to like really plan, dot all the I's, cross all the T's. I wanted to also try and shed that. And the easiest thing to mess up is if you directly paint and directly just add figures. Like, they're definitely out of proportion, those guys over there. And, not observed, that is totally imagined. And I thought it was just funny that they're right next to the leopard.
Yeah.
Which is me. And I don't know who is, I'm not sure who's sitting there that I'm about to, deal with, but the leopard's not even interested with them. The leopard is actually regarding the viewer. But I just thought, like, especially like with that, jacaranda tree, and I just thought, how romantic. That's like a nice romantic scene. Let me have this couple like huddle and, sit there. And then also just not be interested in our space, in the space that everybody's facing this way. They're facing that other side, and who knows what they're looking at. And so that was what was going on in my mind when I sort of inserted them there. Like, if I'd been given another 12 months to make this painting, there would have been a lot more going on. This actually stopped because I had other things, to do. I had to go somewhere.
Life.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
One question.
Yeah.
Maybe this is along with what you were saying, where you kind of come up with it as you go. But I was wondering if what the models or the subjects are wearing comes up while you're painting. Do you think of it ahead of time, like the colors, the actual silhouettes or styles? Because they're all so colorful and beautiful.
Yeah.
I was very curious about that.
No, actually, that's a really good and interesting question, because I want to say there's probably only one person there who is wearing what they actually wore to the shoot. And that's the woman in the Mathenge section. That's like literally what she was wearing.
This one?
Yes. Everyone else, nah. It's like compositional choices, you can't have, all of it is like what looks good. And for instance, the yellow and how you move the eye and all that. So all of that has to be worked post. And so there'll even be like different renditions of the clothing. So at some point, like on the Pippin, like I think it was gray, the tunic, and then it changed color, and then it finally becomes the color that it's supposed to be. But I will keep on working it out, because sometimes something may actually look good, and then after you address something else, color theory, like the way the colors like bounce off against each other, it then kills what originally like looked good. So then you have to go back, and so I constantly. So the thing about my work is that it's colorful, but color is a battle for me in the studio. Like, it's not intuitive the way I think maybe sometimes people think it is. It's a commitment to the fight, to the struggle. Like, we will master it. Yeah, but it's not easy.